Hello and welcome, I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. Military chiefs of India and Pakistan will meet today to discuss next steps after a ceasefire ends the worst fighting in decades. The border remains calm after a peaceful night, though some schools stay closed as a precaution. In a major breakthrough, the US and China agree to cut tariffs by 115% for 90 days, starting on Wednesday. US tariffs on Chinese imports dropped to 30%, while China slashes its rates to 10% after high-stakes talks in Geneva. Ukrainian President Zelensky says he'll personally meet Vladimir Putin in Istanbul on Thursday, just hours after Donald Trump urged Kiev to accept Russia's offer of direct talks. Zelensky calls for a ceasefire to begin on Monday as Western leaders back a 30-day pause to lay ground for peace. Netanyahu says Israel has only agreed to a safe corridor for the release of hostage Edith Alexander, not a ceasefire or prisoner deal. Meanwhile, Gaza officials say an Israeli airstrike on a school sheltering displaced people killed at least 10, including women and children. 68 million Filipinos held to the polls today in midterms seen as a showdown between Marcos and Duterte camps, with control of the Senate key to a possible impeachment of Vice President Sara Duterte. Voters are also choosing lawmakers, governors, mayors and city councillors, with results expected late tonight. President Donald Trump says he will sign an executive order to cut prescription drug prices to match levels paid in other rich nations. The order will enforce most favored nation pricing, slashing costs by up to 80%. Myanmar's shadow government says a junta airstrike killed at least 17 students and injured 20 others at a school in opposition-held Dayapin. The attack comes despite a ceasefire in place after the March 28th earthquake near the Saigon region. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer vows to cut migration, promising a raise residency requirement to 10 years and limit care worker recruitment. English tests will be tougher, but care sector leaders warn the plan could cause a staffing crisis. In the latest development of the India-Pakistan standoff, the Director General of Military Operations, along with his counterpart from the Indian Navy and Air Force, briefed the press. This joint media briefing focused on the current situation following the recent ceasefire understanding between India and Pakistan. Indian armed forces have confirmed the destruction of a Pakistani Mirage fighter jet during Operation Sindoor. Fighter jets of the Indian Air Force targeted key Pakistani Air Force bases at Rafiqi, Merid and Chaklala to counter Pakistan's reckless drone and missile attacks on civilian areas and military infrastructure in India's western sector. Rafiqi Air Base in Punjab province, home to advanced Mirage and JF-17 squadrons, was among the targets, along with Merid, which serves as a hub for drone operations, and Chaklala, a sensitive compound near Islamabad supporting VIP transport and Air Force operations. These strikes were part of a calibrated response to Pakistan's missile and drone offensives, with Indian air defense systems, including the indigenous Akash, successfully intercepting and shooting down Pakistani weaponized drones. According to DG Air Ops, Air Marshal A.K. Bharti, the IAF ensured minimum collateral damage while protecting civilians from harm. The DGMO stated that Pakistan could not breach India's multi-tiered air defense grid, crediting unwavering budgetary and policy support from the government of India for recent successes in air defense. Meanwhile, on the intervening nights of May the 9th and May the 10th, Pakistan launched a massive attack against India, firing wave after wave of missiles and drones targeting several Indian cities. However, due to India's advanced air defense system, all Pakistani projectiles were successfully neutralized. In response to Pakistan's drone attack, India struck back with force, targeting multiple Pakistani air bases, including the Nur Ali Khan Air Base. This base is located just next to Pakistan's army headquarters in Rawalpindi. According to media reports, the attack on Nur Ali Khan Air Base sent shockwaves through Pakistan, with their Chief of Staff, Army Staff General Asim Munir, taking shelter in a bunker for several hours in fear. We are joined by Wing Commander S. Sudhakaran, former Indian Air Force officer. Thank you very much for joining us once again. Wing Commander Sudhakaran, we saw a lot of evidence during this press conference. We had a lot of statements from the top military officials of India. What has this press conference taught us about the capabilities of the Indian military?
I don't think the press conference has revealed anything about our capabilities even remotely. We've just showcased some skills, and that's about it. It's just a trailer that you have seen. The real skills will come to fore when it needs to come. Today, by numbers, we were assessed as the fourth largest air force in the world, but I think we are at best with the best. The kind of display of professionalism that I've seen while I was in service, we didn't have this level of capability. What we have achieved in 3 days probably would have taken us a week or 15 days or a month on a good day. But then this time it was total decimation. This is something never ever seen in the history of campaigns, because mind you, it's a nuclear power that we are dealing with. Not that, we're dealing with some Gaza or some Afghanistan or Iraq or Syria. This is a serious war. Even the Russian-Ukraine, the Ukraine component was not a match for Russia. Here, they always equated Pakistan to India, and see what we have done to them. So China better watch out, and the message would have gone straight. Their J-10s and J-17s came a cropper, and that's what probably let the Pakistanis down. The Turkish drones couldn't come and smell the Indian air. They were shot in the air. Their Fath missiles, which was fired into India, it couldn't cross the border. So what more do you want to see of capabilities?
Yes, if Wing Commander, if you could go into a bit more detail about the precision of this operation, how successful and how professional the Operation Sindoor has been undertaken by India, and in comparison to Pakistan's operation in the other direction.
I think Pakistan self-operated on itself. I don't think they had anything to boast of other than rhetorics, false news, and then contradictions. I didn't see them doing anything at all. So probably Pakistani Air Force was joining Indian Air Force to hit their own terrorism. Now it looks like a kind of a scam for me that the Indian Air Force, they came to the Indian Air Force and said that, let's take the terrorists out. But that looks to be the scheme. Maybe it might appear to be a joke, but then that's how it has panned out. See the impunity with which you have gone inside. You've gone at will, and you've done what you wanted, and actually, you've been not greedy also, because otherwise, on a typical operation day, there'd have been waves after waves with this kind of air dominance that the Indian Air Force had. But then, surprisingly, I was wondering why they didn't execute it to that level. In fact, I had jokingly sent a tweet to the PMO as well as the National Security Advisor that the house which Hafiz Saeed lives and where Dawood Ibrahim lives, even if those people have been taken out to some safe havens, their house should be brought down because, they have caused so much of pain for us. It would have been so very symbolic. I'm still awaiting the next round of campaign. I think Modi would tell them to do that. That is a request from my side on behalf of my countrymen. If I can talk like this and it is on basis of a certain performance, I think you would have understood what Indian Air Force has done to the Pakistanis.
Yes, Wing Commander S. Sud Hakaran, thank you very much for joining us on the program. We now move over to the Middle East, where Israeli-American soldier Eden Alexander, captured by Hamas during its October 2023 attack on Israel, is set to be released today, according to a spokesperson for Hamas's armed wing. Alexander, who is 21 years old, is believed to be the last living U.S. hostage held in Gaza. The announcement comes just ahead of President Donald Trump's scheduled visit to the Middle East. Trump called the news monumental in a Truth Social post, celebrating what his administration had earlier labelled a top priority. Hamas claims the release is part of efforts to reach a ceasefire deal and allow humanitarian aid into Gaza, now under total Israeli blockade for 71 days. However, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has dismissed any link between the hostages' release and a possible truce or prisoner exchange. Israeli strikes on Gaza continue. The Gazan Health Ministry has stated that at least 17 people have been reported dead in a strike on a school shelter overnight, as negotiations over remaining hostages continue under fire. We're now joined by Peter Baum, foreign editor of the Weekly Blitz, located in Israel. Thank you very much for joining us, Peter. I want to get your thoughts on the release of this American hostage. Obviously, since Israel has resumed its offensive and expanded it since on the Gaza Strip, we have had no release of hostages. But this here is the first one. Israel has freed several hundred Palestinian prisoners during these past swaps. Why rule that out when so many still are left in custody?
Yes, that's a very interesting question. May I just say that I'm currently located in the UK. And
apologies, Peter.
Thank you for the question. It's clear from any perspective that this Gaza war could have been ended 18 months ago had all the hostages been released. Of that there is no doubt. This drip feed of releasing one more hostage only serves the Hamas public relations exercise of prolonging the war. And I have no doubt when the hostage, the American-Israeli hostage is released, he will be well fed and looking well, as part of the Hamas propaganda program. I think the Israeli government and the Israeli society have got to the stage now where nothing less than the total destruction of Hamas, both militarily and politically, is their sole objective. And Israeli society is divided on this, as we can see. It was very interesting listening to your previous guest talking about the India-Pakistan issue. Whilst Israel has been greatly successful militarily, and I'll come on to that in a second, it has lost the public relations war. We know that the Western media, whether it's the BBC or CNN or MSNBC, or even indeed Al Jazeera, which serves much of the West but is basically a puppet of Qatar, is grossly biased against the Jewish state of Israel, and may I add, against India in its conflict with Pakistan. So the PR war has been lost. But let's just revert back militarily, and again, to answer your question on the hostages. The big loser in all of this has been Iran, I would suggest. Pre-October 7th, Iran's proxies in Hezbollah, the Houthis and Hamas were firing rockets into, not the Houthis, but certainly Hezbollah and Hamas were firing rockets into Israel virtually on a daily basis. And Israel was responding with a kind of a slap on the wrist. October the 7th happened, and Israel went in very, very strong. And coming to where we are today, Hezbollah has been decimated as a military force. Hamas as a military force, I would suggest, has been decimated. And because of the Houthis' involvement, we've seen the United States, the United Kingdom, and Israel, I may add, all bombing the Houthi positions to a level where their airports are inoperative. So I think the end game here is to virtually dilute the power that Iran once had 18 months ago, which has now been decimated. Now, going back to the hostages,
Peter, I was going to say, if we could divert the conversation back into the situation with the hostages. Obviously, even domestically in Israel, there's mass protests on a regular basis against the Netanyahu government and how they're handling the situation. Obviously, this is the first hostage we have seen released after the resumed offensive. Why does it seem that Israel isn't willing to give anything back to Hamas for releasing these hostages? After all, these hostages is Hamas's only bargaining chip at the moment.
This is my reading from the sources I have within Israel. Israel's society.
And Peter,
do
forgive me, but if you could tip your computer screen to get your full face in frame, that would be brilliant.
Israel's society has always been divided, and it seems now it's become when they were united after October the 7th. This division is rearing its head again because much of the Israeli society is very anti the Netanyahu government, which, let's face it, only is ruling with a very, very slim majority. It's being propped up by the more extreme elements of the right wing of Israeli society and the ultra-Orthodox elements in Israeli society. The opposition has, let's say on the left, which was united behind the Netanyahu government immediately after October the 7th, is now saying, look, his handling of the war has got us, the hostages have not been released, which was the ultimate aim. In public relations terms, Israelis and Jews worldwide are having a terrible time. Anti-Semitism is rearing its ugly head, and the blame of this division within Israeli society is being put squarely on Netanyahu and his government. And it seems that the division now suggests get the hostages out, end the war, stop the bombing of Gaza. The opposition to Netanyahu is having none of the previous support that it once had. And I'm afraid that it seems that Mr. Netanyahu and his government are digging their heels in and saying, no, the objective is solely to defeat Hamas politically and militarily. And if that means that the hostage situation is an ongoing situation, so be it, despite their rhetoric of always suggesting they only want the hostages to be released.
Peter Baum, thank you very much for joining us and your insights on the programme. We now move over to Europe, where Britain's Foreign Minister David Lammy has called on Russian President Vladimir Putin to get serious about peace as European ministers gathered in London for talks on Ukraine. This comes just days after Kiev's allies urged Moscow to accept a 30-day ceasefire. This is what the Foreign Minister of the United Kingdom said.
This is the time for Vladimir Putin to get serious about peace in Europe, to get serious about a ceasefire, and to get serious about talks. We in Europe, of course, will prepare for any peace, and that will be a substantial part of our discussions this morning. But equally, we must also be prepared if this is not a moment of seriousness from Putin and we do not get that peace.
Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says he's open to meeting Putin personally in Turkey. Let's listen in to what the Ukrainian president said on the matter.
Я буду в цей четвер, 15 травня, в Туреччині. І очікую на Путіна в Туреччині. Особисто. І сподіваюся, що Путін цього разу не шукатиме причин, чому він щось не може. Ми готові говорити, щоб закінчити війну. Четвер. Туреччина. Президент Трамп підтримав. Всі лідери підтримують.
The Kremlin did not immediately respond to Zelensky's offer, and the Ukrainian leader did not say whether he would still attend if Russia refused a 30-day ceasefire proposed by Kiev and its allies. Putin on Sunday proposed to resume the talks between the two sides held in Istanbul in March of 2022, but he did not respond to the 30-day ceasefire proposal put forward by the allies. Moscow and Kiev have not held face-to-face negotiations since that time in Istanbul, shortly after Russia and Ukraine's war broke out. US President Trump wrote on his Truth Social platform earlier, quote unquote, President Putin of Russia doesn't want to have a ceasefire agreement with Ukraine, but rather wants to meet on Thursday in Turkey to negotiate a possible end to the bloodbath. Trump has further said that Ukraine should agree to this immediately. In a related development, Ukraine's Air Force reported 108 drones launched, with 55 shot down. Strikes wounded one person in Odessa and a train driver in Donetsk, damaging homes and railway infrastructure. Ukrainian National Railways confirmed continued strikes despite a 30-day ceasefire appeal. Meanwhile, an Australian man has been killed in Ukraine, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese confirmed today. Media reports identify him as a former soldier volunteering for US-based charity Prevail Together, which supports landmine clearance. He and a British colleague died near Izium after an improvised explosive device detonated inside a building. Australian Foreign Affairs Department is assisting the family, and Albanese said the man was not involved in combat and support is being provided. Let's listen in to the Australian Prime Minister.
Going forward, it's important to express the deepest condolences and sympathies with his family and his loved ones at this very difficult time. I can confirm, though, he wasn't a participant in the conflict. He was volunteering with a humanitarian organisation. And so I do want to remind Australians that Ukraine is a do-not-travel zone.
Moving on now, the United States and China have struck a breakthrough deal to slash reciprocal tariffs by 115% for 90 days. US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent confirmed the agreement after marathon trade talks in Geneva. Here's what he said.
We have reached an agreement on a 90-day pause and substantially moved down the tariff levels. Both sides on the reciprocal tariffs will move their tariffs down 115%.
A joint statement says both nations will cut tariffs sharply, with the US slashing rates from 145 to 30% and China cutting them from 125 to 10%. Markets surged as the news came. Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index jumped over 3%, while the US Wall Street futures also spiked, boosting global optimism. Both sides hail substantial progress. Chinese Vice Premier He Lifeng called it important consensus, with WTO chief Ngozi Ojogo-Iweala welcoming the positive outcome and urging continued dialogue. Meanwhile, China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi hosted Latin American leaders in Beijing ahead of the CELAC summit. This is part of China's push for closer global ties amid these trade tensions. A consultation mechanism has also been established to prevent future escalations. We're now joined by Quinton A. Hitchcock, U.S. affairs expert located in Texas, to discuss this further. Thank you very much, Quinton, for joining us. A 115% drop on tariffs for both countries. This is a substantial development. Is this a win for both of the world's largest economies?
Yeah, I think it's a temporary win, and it's good to be with you, Thomas. I've heard economists describe this as a manufactured tariff agreement, meaning this doesn't really address any of the key issues that can assure a long-term solution for both countries. So it's certainly a temporary component. I would characterize it as a win for both countries, but I think this is also coming at an interesting time. The Trump White House desperately needs a win on the economy. We know right now that their handling of the economy, President Trump's handling of the economy specifically, is polling very, very low amongst American voters. So I think that was definitely at the top of his mind. That's always a top priority for the president is his poll numbers and specifically how he is handling things like global trade and the economy. And then another aspect of this is his trip coming up to the Middle East. I think that the timing of that was everything for the president. I think that explains why he was so aggressive in not necessarily coming to a tariff agreement with China, because we know this was temporary, but really coming out with an announcement. I think that he wanted to boast that and look as powerful as he could, which I'm not sure if that accomplishes what he set out to do, but his trip to the Middle East, I think, expedited this entire process.
Yes, and Quinton, do you think that both Washington and Beijing might fear that they might appear weak after they both seceded 115% of tariffs each?
Yeah, the number of this to me doesn't make a lot of sense. This doesn't address the manufacturing concern that the president has voiced for many years. So, I sit back and kind of wonder, okay, what does this accomplish, other than, for the next 90 days, hopefully global markets and American markets tend to soar a little bit. I think, recently, I think given all of the volatility that we've seen in the markets, the tariff conversation is directly responsible for that. So it's unclear what the short-term and the long-term goal is here. But to be very clear, this temporary agreement does not do anything to touch some of the key issues that are necessary for making a long-term trade deal with China.
Quinton, critics might say that this was announced in a grand grandeur, right? But would they say that maybe this is just fixing the mess that Donald Trump has made in regards to the economy? And as you've said previously, that they're not in any advancement. They're not in a better position than they were prior to when Donald Trump announced these tariffs.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair observation. I think Trump is kind of famous for course correcting. He'll make certain decisions. Maybe he goes a little too far on a number of different issues. And this is nothing more than course correction. So I think that a lot of this is just undoing some of the instability, if you will, that our markets have seen as a result of the tariff conversation in general. But yeah, this is very perplexing. And a couple days, rewind the tape just 2 or 3 days before our Treasury Secretary met with his Chinese counterparts, expectations for this were very, very low. So I don't know that they were expecting certainly not expecting any kind of long-term deal, much less a short-term deal. So The fact that they're announcing this, I think Trump just wants to boast ahead of his Middle East trip. And I think he feels that gives him a lot more leverage on the broader foreign policy front as it pertains to many, many different issues in many different countries.
Quinton A. Hitchcock, thank you very much for joining us on the programme and for your insight. We now move over to Africa now, where at least 100 civilians were killed near Silenzo in March. Human Rights Watch says Burkina Faso's army and militias were reportedly responsible. The victims were ethnic Fulani, a group often accused by the government of aiding Islamist militants. Videos and testimony gathered show men in military gear firing at civilians. Drones were seen flying above the villages during the attacks. The killings were part of a larger offensive between February the 27th and April the 2nd this year, where hundreds of soldiers and pro-government militia took part. One witness said that they were shot at like animals, and even women and children couldn't escape, as many died trying to flee the scene. That is a witness statement. The government has denied the allegations, calling the reports fake and harmful to national unity. After the attack, jihadist fighters from JNIM returned to the villages. They executed men they believed were working with the army. A woman from Tayo said she counted 70 bodies outside a health centre. Today, many Fulani survivors have fled to Mali, while others were killed or captured. Analysts say the junta's tactics, including arming civilians, have made ethnic tensions worse. More than 60% of Burkina Faso is no longer under government control. Over 2 million people are displaced, with Human Rights Watch demanding an impartial investigation. The junta has yet to respond as the Sahel region continues to spiral into violence. Now we move over to the United States, where United States President Donald Trump has unveiled plans for a new policy on pharmaceuticals. He claimed would reduce US prescription drug prices between 30 and 80%. In his Truth Social post, he read, "They will rise throughout the world in order to equalize and, for the first time in many years, bring fairness to America," adding he planned to sign an executive order bringing the new policy into effect. Trump said he planned to institute a most favored nations policy that pinned the cost of drugs sold in the United States to the lowest price paid by other countries for the same drug. Most favored nation status is a World Trade Organization rule that aims to prevent discrimination between a country and its trading partners, leveling the playing field for international trade. This is not the first time that Trump has attempted to lower US drug prices. During his first term, he in office announced a similar proposal to cut US drug prices, but his plans failed in the face of strong opposition from the pharmaceutical industry. Last month, US President signed an executive order aiming at lowering crippling drug prices by giving states more leeway to bargain hunt abroad and improving the process for price negotiations. Now over to the Indo-Pacific, where China is strengthening ties with Latin America, and it's happening right now in Beijing. Foreign Minister Wang Yi held talks on Monday with his counterpart from Peru, Uruguay and from Venezuela. The high-level meetings come ahead of a major summit between China and the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States, known as CELAC. The summit kicks off on Tuesday, May the 13th, with President Xi Jinping set to deliver the opening address. Wang Yi will chair the forum, which brings together foreign ministers and representatives from across the region. Also in Beijing, Cuban Foreign Minister Bruno Rodriguez, Uruguay's Mario Letcabin, Peru's Elmer Schaefer, and Venezuela's Yvonne Gil. The China CELAC Forum aims to deepen cooperation on trade, investment and infrastructure, all under China's Belt and Road Initiative. As tensions with Washington continue, Beijing is looking to Latin America for stronger economic partnerships. Let's move on once again, where opening statements in Sean Combs' sex trafficking trial are set for today. The music mogul faces racketeering and abuse charges and is accused of running a sex crime ring. Coombs, who is 55 years old, pleads not guilty to the charges. Jurors will be finalised today after a delay, and the panel will remain anonymous but not sequestered. Evidence includes a 2016 video of Coombs assaulting then-girlfriend Cassie Ventura. She is a key witness in this case. The defence claims all acts were consensual. The case could last months. Coombs is one of hip-hop's most influential figures, now facing life in prison if convicted. He's allowed to wear civilian clothing during the trial. Well, that's all we have time for. We will continue to bring you all the news stories from around the world. Thank you very much for joining us.